The year is 1899. The frontier is dying, and nowhere in Red Dead Redemption 2 feels more alive or more dangerous than the blood red soil of Scarlet Meadows. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most historically rich regions in the entire game. We're talking about the real Deep South that inspired Lemoyne. The echoes of the Civil War still rattling round, and the feuding families that feel ripped straight from the headlines of the 1880s in a world caught between what it used to be and what it's terrified to become. To help us do that, we've brought in someone who doesn't just play this game, he teaches with it. Tore Olsson is a professor at the University of Tennessee and the author of Red Dead's history. He uses Red Dead Redemption 2 in actual history classrooms to bring the dying West back to life. I'm Sam,
I'm Zai.
and this is the Outlaw Haven. Class is in session. Let's start with you telling us about how you got into this first of all.
Yeah.
Like how you even
Yeah,
started using Red Dead Redemption to teach history classes.
sure. Well, first off, Sam, Zai, thank you guys so much for hosting me. It is very exciting to be on the Outlaw Haven podcast, and I love the idea that two friends who've really enjoyed this game so much have devoted an entire podcast to it because, as you know, there's a lot to talk about.
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that there's you need this game and the world that it tries to represent. It needs a lot of time and space and attention. And it's just so crazy to think of how many millions and millions of folks have engaged, implicitly with American history through this video game. And especially Red Dead 2. Like I'm imagining most of our conversation will be about the second game rather than the first game. The first game's cool, to be sure, but I have a soft spot for the second game just because
Yeah.
it's more recent and it's so much bigger and so much richer as well. Yeah,
Abs-
so I am a history professor, right, as you mentioned, at the University of Tennessee, and I'm a specialist on modern American history, really American history since the Civil War, last 150 years or so. And I've been teaching here for 13 years at this point. I did my PhD at the University of Georgia, so I have been a Southerner for a long time, though I'm not a native born Southerner. I'm actually from the south of Sweden, believe it or not. I'm an immigrant who came to the US when I was a lot younger. But this combination of teaching history, academic, serious history through video games, is something that I really came upon in the midst of the pandemic. And the pandemic, turned all of our lives upside down, and it led to many, many horrific things, and in some senses, some good things because some of us were confined at home and we had to change up our entire routine, and that was very much the case for me. So when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, I just gotten tenure. I'd published a previous academic book. I was fairly, sort of comfortable in my career. I was able to undertake some experiments. And in the midst of the dark days of the pandemic, I decided to return to a hobby of mine that I had not taken part in for a very, very long time, which was video gaming. So, just for background context here, I grew up as a hardcore video gamer. Like, I was so obsessed, especially with PC gaming in the 1990s when I was going to high school, in the late 90s, especially. And I had just been, I lived and breathed video games for very long. Huge part of my adolescence was spent behind a screen and, with a controller or mouse and keyboard in hand. But when I went to college, I quit. I quit video gaming pretty much completely. I did not assume I'd ever go back. And I literally took 20 years off from gaming from the 2000, when I graduated high school, to 2020 when the pandemic hit. And in that time, like I got more serious. I went to school, earned a graduate degree, and became a professor. But throughout all those years, I'd always been curious about kind of going back to my old hobby because, once you're a gamer, you're kind of always a gamer. Let's be honest. You can't
Yeah.
really give it up. I mean, you can take breaks
yep.
from it, but if it's part of your soul, you really can't extract it. It's just there. um, so for me, in March of 2020, the pandemic was really the incentive for me to like dip my toes back into gaming. And I was able to buy one of the very last gaming PCs before they all sold out in that spring and summer. And I just, wanted to get back to my old hobby. in, as an adult, as a professional. But of course, one of the first games that I picked up in the pandemic was Red Dead Redemption 2. And ironically enough, I picked it up because it was recommended to me by one of my colleagues, another historian here who does the history of the Civil War era. He said, "Hey, Tori, like if you're getting back into gaming, check out Red Dead Redemption 2. It's basically like a 90-hour HBO show. It's very well written, it's got great graphics." And, from one historian to another, he gave it very high praise, which is that he said, it's not stupid. That might sound like damning praise in some ways, but like among historians, when we talk about pop culture, that's actually a really good thing. Like it's not
Mm.
stupid. That means like this is worth it. This is worth taking part in. So this must have been like April or May of 2020 that I start playing Red Dead 2 just for a hobby, right? Just for fun, just as a way to pass the time in isolation. And but it soon becomes much more than that. Because of course, when I'm playing this game in 2020, I'm not just a high school video game nerd anymore. I'm a professional historian who's trained in exactly the same time period that this game is trying to represent. And what's really interesting for our conversation today on Scarlet Meadows is that I'm really trained as a Southern historian. Historians tend to have regional expertise, and while I had read a lot of Western and Midwestern and Northeastern history, you know, I got my PhD in Georgia and I teach in Tennessee. And a lot of the work that I had focused on was Southern history. So for me, what really clicked, like what really convinced me to teach a class and then write a book on the game, really came in, I guess it is chapter 3, right? Like when you go
Mhm.
to
Yep.
the South, when you go into Lemoyne, when you enter Scarlet Meadows, when you walk into Saint Denis, that was the moment that convinced me that like, hey, I could write about this. Because I'm okay with Western history, but like I'm really a Southern historian, and I had no idea that this game was going to go into the Deep South. Like I just thought it was going to be a quote unquote Western, maybe to go to Mexico like the first game, but that it was not going to go to like New Orleans or Mississippi or places like that.
Hmm.
And that's to me that was the game's decision to move into the South was so unexpected, in part because the first game really doesn't do that at all, and secondly because there is an overabundance of books and movies and TV shows and games that are about the American West, but there's really not that many about the American South.
Hmm.
um, it's just a less, it's so much more I mean, the West is complicated too, but the South is really complicated in this time period, and it doesn't lend itself well to mythology and romanticization and this sort of thing. So I was super impressed at how the game tried to cover Southern history and geography and landscape and all that. And also that it did, a fairly good job at it. I mean, of course, I have critiques and, there's particular things that it falls short on. But on the whole, this was like the game presents a really interesting portrayal of the South in the 1890s. So I don't know. I got lots more to talk about. And as you guys know, from if you've read the book, Red Dead's History, I spend a lot of time on the South, and probably more time in the book than the game actually spends in the South. Partially because I'm just so interested in this region.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned with Red Dead 1 how you how there's more to kind of touch on with that, and when I was doing research, I came across a Reddit thread that you did a few years
Yeah,
back talking about um, how at the beginning of your course you talked about Red Dead 1 and the Mexican Revolution, and
yeah.
how you were kind of disappointed on how there wasn't space in the book to really do that. So if you could do like a second edition of Red Dead History,
Mm.
would that be something you would touch on more?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's so funny. So I wrote my first book, which has nothing to do with video games whatsoever, about the US and Mexico, particularly in the early 20th century when the Mexican Revolution was fundamentally transforming that country and really the world, because this was like a worldwide event. People across the world were paying attention to what was happening in Mexico. And in many ways, I would argue that the Mexican Revolution, which takes place between 1911 and about 1920, was really the first kind of grassroots social revolution of the 20th century. And there were many others to follow, right? Most importantly, the Soviet Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the Chinese Revolution. And in many ways, the Mexican Revolution is this sort of blueprint that, kind of is the dress rehearsal, the forerunner to many of those other sweeping social revolutions. So I'm like totally obsessed with Mexico and like the tremendous drama and bloodshed of those years and how meaningful they were to shaping the future, not just of Mexico, but really all of North America and beyond. And I was so surprised to see a video game, take this on with Red Dead 2, 1 when John Marston goes down into Mexico in 1911 and encounters, this country in the midst of a revolution. And the game, tries to depict some of the big personalities within that revolution, right? Like this dictator, Porfirio Diaz, who had been running Mexico for many years at that point, and some of the revolutionaries like Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa and others, And does Red Dead 1 do a marvelous job in capturing the dynamics of the Mexican Revolution? Not really, It has some interesting moments, but it kind of flattens and romanticizes it a good bit. But still, like the fact that a video game would go there, no, it's kind of interesting. It's pretty cool. So yes, I would love to have an expanded version of the book that would spend more time on Red Dead 1 and on particularly the Mexican chapters, because of course that's one thing that Red Dead 2 does not have.
Mm-mm.
There's lots of West in Red Dead 2, but there is no Mexico within it. As far as I know, I've never been able to go south of the border yet.
No, not
Not
without
not
glitches.
without glitching. So getting back to the Deep South, how is the game similar and different from real reality? I want to say real life and reality at the same time.
Yeah. Well, so what's really interesting is the timing of this, right? So the game is set in 1899, and most folks probably don't think of the 1890s as that important of a decade in Southern history, but it really, really was. I think like when most folks think of like turning points in Southern history, they think about the 1860s with the Civil War or the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Freedom Struggle, overturning of Jim Crow and all this.
Mm.
But the 1890s, I would argue, like deserves the bronze medal, like the third most important decade in Southern history, mainly because it's at this very moment that the institutional regime of Jim Crow is put into place. Like all of the segregation laws, or at least the majority of them, um, the disfranchisement, that is, black men being removed from the voter rolls, being eliminated from democracy in the South. That's an 1890s project. And then also this real intensification of the mythology of the lost cause, this idea of, airbrushing the history of the Confederacy and making it not about slavery and putting up statues and putting up Confederate battle flags. All of that stuff goes down in the 1890s. Like it's this huge turning point when the South, especially the white South, remakes itself in this whole new, different image. And it's at that very moment that, Arthur Morgan rides into Lemoyne, and the game captures some of this. It captures some of the sort of transitional moments within Southern society at that point. Like, for example, with the main rival gang in Lemoyne, which are the Lemoyne Raiders,
Hmm.
who are these embittered ex-Confederates that still wear the gray uniforms of the Confederate States Army, who clearly have it out for anyone who's an outsider who's in this region, And I don't know if you guys know, but like I don't get I don't really know where Arthur Morgan is from. Like I imagine maybe he's from the West. He kind of has a Southern accent. We do know that Dutch Vanderland is like a Northerner,
Yeah,
right? That his dad had
Pennsylvania.
died in the Confederate War, in the Civil War. Um, but I don't know if where Arthur is really from. Do you guys have
Yeah,
theories about that?
I think Arthur, well, kind of going from what like Roger has said in interviews and panels, um
Yeah,
he mostly I think tried to take from, of course, Hollywood movies,
yeah,
but a lot of it was South and little bit of the South and like more of like the West and stuff as well.
yeah, yeah.
We know
Maybe
that
maybe the
Dutch and
real life
Hosea.
Arthur is. Maybe he's from like Missouri or something, someplace that's
Yeah.
both southern and western.
Well, because I've
Because we know that Dutch and
always.
Hosea meet up in Kettering, Ohio,
Hmm.
and then they pick up Arthur soon after, and then
Mm.
they pick up John in Chicago. So they have to go, I'm assuming, from Ohio to Chicago over a span of like 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But so anyhow, the Lemoyne Raiders, they're not buddies with the Vanderlyn gang.
No.
These are
No.
not your friends in this chapter. And the Lemoyne Raiders are portrayed in this very, negative light, to be sure. But they're one element of this lost cause mythology in that they, frequently speak about the war in these very nostalgic terms. It seems like these guys actually believe that the South had won the war. And in fact, there's this little line of conversation where Lenny Summers, your black gang mate, he's like, yeah, these guys think that the South won, that the South, that
Hmm.
they're still fighting the war, which, it's not, yeah, this is 35 years after the Civil War ends. But in the minds of many white Southerners, this, not that the war was still going, but like the debate over what the war meant was still very much going on in 1899, to be
Hmm.
sure. In fact, it's maybe at the high tide at that moment. So many of the Confederate memorials that have been debated and torn down, some of them in the last 10, 15 years, so many of them were put up in the 1890s, right? And directly afterward in the 1900s. So these statues, if the game was being fully realistic, those statues that you see in Rhodes, in Saint Denis, they would be really new, and the game makes them look kind of old. If you study the textures of what those, it looks in the game as if those statues had been standing since, let's say, 1865, 1866. That would not have been true. There were very few public memorials that were put up directly after the war. Really comes like at the turn of the century in the 1890s and 1900s.
Interesting. Um.
Yeah, so I kind of wish that the developers and art designers had done a slightly better job by making the statues look really new. But I
Hmm.
bet it would have confused some players. They're like, "Wait, the
Probably.
Civil War is like really old at this point. Why are these statues new?" Well, that's what
Right.
requires the context of like explaining why are these statues being put up. It's not an accident that they're coming up in the 1890s. There's reasons why.
Hmm. Yeah, that would have been kind of interesting to see, like especially
Yeah.
in Saint Denis with
Mm-hmm.
like the statues of Quincy Harris in the like town center, and then the
Right,
event
with
where you can see.
coward scrawled on the
Yeah.
side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super interesting. Now, there's another. So I talked about the 1890s as being like this crucial, pivotal moment when a lot is changing in the South. One of the most important things that's changing is that tons of cities, states are adding these laws that formally segregate public space. That say,
Hmm.
put up signs that say for white, for colored, right? For these, racial divisions, for waiting rooms and for bathrooms and for train cars and all of that kind of stuff. And I was really curious to see whether Red Dead 2 would include that. And especially in the epilogue, right? Because after Arthur dies, when you play as John, then it's 1907, right? Or 1906.
Yeah. Oh
It's,
seven.
a good bit afterward. And I was curious because the games do depict certain changes taking place in that
Hmm.
6 or 7 year time span, but they say nothing about the system of racial segregation. Because as I know it as a historian, in 1899, when Arthur's riding around, that system is beginning to come into place, but it's still incomplete. It's still kind of like a patchwork system where
Hmm.
you'd have some things segregated and some things not. Like the streetcars in New Orleans, for example, are not segregated in 1899, but by 1907 they definitely are. So if the game was being much more realistic, it would have um, showed that these visual markers of segregation would have been visible across the city of Saint Denis or the town of Rhodes. That would very much have been the case, certainly by 1907.
Yeah.
Why do you guys think that Rockstar didn't do that?
I think. I mean, like you said with the trolley, I think part of that is just simply coding. It just makes it easier to code when like pedestrians are like sitting in the trolley and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, and then a lot of it is people don't look, but at the same time, it's like especially Saint Denis, there's so many just little details and stuff. Like there's even the
Hmm.
old school fire hydrants around there, and that lead
Yeah.
to nowhere, but it's still
They pay attention to detail. We know
yeah,
that, you know. I
Hmm.
I think they were just worried about controversy, about upsetting gamers.
yeah.
I mean,
That's
the
That's what
just
I was
games,
gonna say.
yeah. I mean, the games do allude to racism,
mm-hmm.
like they showcase the Klan. Lenny often talks about, I mean, Charles, they talk about the realities of living in a society where, ideologies of white supremacy were very powerful. But I think that Rockstar was anxious about, people taking screenshots of this and trying to say, oh, look, Rockstar's made a racist game that's segregated. Well,
Yep.
I mean,
the
there is
reality
that
is that,
there's that mission. It's like a side mission that you find in Rhodes where
Oh yeah,
oh,
there's
with the
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 doctor.
doctor.
a doctor where
Yeah.
they stole his medicine wagon.
Right, and they threaten him with lynching. That's a
Yeah.
really
Mm.
fascinating scene. I don't think the game depicts a lynching, but it shows the threat of this, like a
Mm-hmm.
veiled threat. And actually, I use that moment in the book to open the chapter on lynching because Dr. I think Renault was his name. He talks about these horrific threats of violence that these white men who stole his wagon, um, um, you know, kind of intimidate him with. And it's a pretty dark scene. I mean, it's really pretty like the music changes, like it's supposed to be very serious for good
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
reason.
Yeah. It's like that's just it. And I guess on the topic of lynching in Saint Denis, when we get to like meet Bronte, and I noticed there's actually kind of a few similarities between um, him and then the Montrega family. I think is how you pronounce that. Um, but because in the newspapers, there's a article that's talking about how the police chief of Saint Denis, or one of the officers, is supposedly like he was killed after like holding evidence for like Bronte type of a thing, and he
Yeah.
never nothing was happened with Bronte, of course, but
Hmm.
um, it's similar in real life with the Davis Hennessy. He was killed, and that led to one of the largest mass lynchings, I think.
Right,
Um,
not of African Americans, but of
yeah,
Sicilian immigrants.
yeah.
And that's what's so interesting about the games, because the games, Red Dead 2 does reference the fact that there's a large Sicilian, Italian American, immigrant presence in New Orleans, which is very true in the 1890s as well. It's just that the game depicts them as being like the kingpins who run the town. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
the ones, controlling they got the mayor in their pocket, they got the police in their pocket, they got the Pinkertons in their pocket. But the reality is, most Sicilian Americans in New Orleans at the turn of the century are, really humble, working class people, and they're more likely to be victims rather than victimizers, right? Because of this 1891 mass lynching. I don't know if you guys knew this, but in writing my book, I discovered that mass lynching of Italian immigrants in New Orleans is the reason we have Columbus Day in the United
Oh,
States.
interesting.
Because when this happened, I mean, look, the Italian embassy, like the Italian, diplomats in the U.S. are absolutely infuriated. They're like, this is an attack on Italy. This is an attack on Italians. This is incredibly discriminatory and awful. And the American president at the time, I think it was Benjamin Harrison. I can't quite remember some of these Gilded Age presidents, but he felt so awkward about it that very soon thereafter he instituted Columbus Day, which was meant to celebrate the contributions of Italians to American history. So it was like meant to be like an olive branch after this horrific violence had erupted in New Orleans previously. And this was their way of kind of atoning for the sins of these white mobs, of these native born white mobs in New Orleans. So, every time you celebrate Columbus Day, think about, oh, maybe Angelo Bronte is somehow involved. I mean, not really, but
In Saint Denis, there's a bunch of random encounters you can have with
yeah.
women's suffrage, and
Hmm.
the other one that stands out is, of course, the one lady on the corner asking for donations for like the Salvation Army, basically.
Hmm.
Along with, of course, there's multiple others, but it's just interesting how the encounters change specifically in the city versus out even in Scarlet Meadows, where we don't really get that many other than like chain gangs.
Well,
Really,
the Ku
that's
Klux
it.
Klan,
And the
that's a big
clan.
moment to be sure. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
one that it seems like all gamers remember.
Mm-hmm.
This is like an unforgettable moment when they're riding through the woods in Scarlet Meadows and at night, it has to be at night, and
Yep.
you see, torches in the trees and you're like, what's going on here? And I would always sneak up and listen in and see what they're talking about. And so this is, I use that in the book as well as a way to explore the history of the Ku Klux Klan, because in one sense, the game is completely wrong in that in 1899, the Klan basically didn't exist in the South. It had previously existed and it would later exist, but you really catch them in 1899, like in the eye of the storm, like at a real lull point,
Mm-hmm.
because there's the Klan that's tremendously powerful and influential during Reconstruction, like from 1865 to 1872 or so. And then there's the second Klan that gets reborn in 1915, 1916. So, 20 years after Red Dead 2 ish is set. And I mean, yes, it's an anti Black Klan, but it's also more than that. It's an anti immigrant Klan, it's an anti Catholic Klan in the 19 teens and 20s. So the game is like, they do stretch the truth because of like the timing of it. 1899 wouldn't make some sense, but they're right that like, paramilitary groups that wore these kinds of robes and costumes, they were an important part of Southern history, just
Mm-hmm.
not so much at that particular moment.
Right, yeah. And I love the little detail where if you kill any of the members, you gain honor for it.
Yeah, right. There's like basically no other civilians that you can kill and receive that
Yeah.
sort
There's one
of
There's also
other.
the pamphlet guy in Saint Denis. If you kill him,
Yeah.
Oh,
you can
the
kill him right in front
eugenics
of a law.
guy.
There's
Yeah.
a officer that's standing right next to him. If you kill him right in front of that cop, he doesn't do anything.
Yeah, there's him,
Wow.
and then
I have to say that
there's.
is actually unrealistic because
Yeah.
the cops were probably eugenicists themselves, unfortunately, in 1899.
Yeah.
It's sad to say.
Because I think there's only three moments that happens. Like we said, the Ku Klux Klan and the eugenists. But there's also a homestead that's owned by a previous slave owner that you meet in Rhodes who's sleeping on the
Oh, Jeremiah
bench,
Compson.
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah.
And if you
Yeah.
kill him, you also get honor for it.
Right. I remember, oh man, I remember, did you guys watch when Roger Clark's live streamed himself playing Red Dead 2?
I
It was
tuned in
I
a
really,
watched
little
really,
some
bit,
of it.
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was thrilled to appear on as a guest on one of the episodes, which was fun. But I was watching a few previous ones when he was playing, so I remember that pivotal moment when you have to, make a decision about Jeremiah Compson and how to do it. And as Roger was replaying, he's like, "I really hate this guy. I'm gonna toss like a flame, a Molotov cocktail, basically like a flame cocktail." But he does so, but it lights himself on fire too
Oh
and
no.
dies while trying to take out Jeremiah Compton. It was a very embarrassing moment that Roger was like, "Oh, what am I doing here?"
uh,
Since this is more so about roads, because we're kind of using this as like our segue into the chapter 3 with the Clemens Point chapters, which we
Yeah.
will get into in the next couple episodes.
yeah, pretty
But
much all in this month.
um yeah,
Let me share what's one of my
yeah,
favorite
go
parts
for it.
about
Oh, yeah.
Scarlet Meadows is that it is the most intensely agricultural region in the entire
Yes.
game. You see farms in the West, right? There's like a couple wheat farms, but I really love how the game captures Scarlet Meadows and kind of Lemoyne as a whole, not as this wild space where you can set up camp wherever you want, but as a really, domesticated, cultivated agricultural space where you have cotton fields, you have tobacco fields, and you also have sugarcane as well, outside, north of Saint Denis. So you had these three crops that were, in fact, totally important to the South in the 1890s, and especially cotton. In fact, if the game was being fully realistic, there would have been more cotton than any of the other crops because it was by far the biggest cash crop in the region, even more so than before the Civil War. And that's something a lot of people find surprising that, in fact, the South is producing way more cotton in 1900 than it was in 1860, even after slavery had been abolished. So it's kind of a big paradox of Southern history. And cotton did no favors to most people. I mean, it was like a curse in so many ways.
Hmm.
Interesting. Did you
I
find what it
used to
was
be an
soon?
agricultural historian. I used to be
Oh,
obsessed with
fun.
all of this stuff. My first book was totally in that world too.
I want to talk about Boulder Glade
Yes.
This is the
specifically.
battlefield, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's technically a Civil War battlefield, and there's the dead soldier that you can find that's
Yeah, Garfield that's pinned to the tree.
Garfield. Yeah. So, how realistic is like Boulder Glade as far as like the Civil War?
Well, certainly there were hundreds and hundreds of battles within the South during the war. I mean, most of the war plays out on Southern soil. Most of the fighting does. So the idea that you would have rusting cannons and sort of, battlements and trenches with moss growing over them, it's not entirely unrealistic. They probably would have been in the 34 years since the war ended. They probably would have been scavenged, and people would have picked up, some of the kind of metals and things that they could to reclaim. So I doubt that there would be, it probably looks the game makes it seem as if the Civil War was like pretty recently.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
34, 35 years is not that recently. Um, it's surprising that I don't remember any memorials of any sort near the battlefield. It's just kind of like,
No, isn't.
yeah, by 1899 there probably would have been more of that. I don't know. I don't think it's yeah, I don't have a strong opinion that it's bizarrely unrealistic. You probably wouldn't have seen many of those sites across the South
Mm-hmm.
that long afterward, but that's not totally crazy.
Yeah, because I've seen online that the Battle of Scarlet Meadows is like loosely based off of the Red River campaign
Hmm,
that happened, of course, in Louisiana. Um,
right.
I guess I don't know how, yeah, correct that would be because obviously we don't see the battle itself.
Sure. Yeah, well, the game does imply that the leadership of the Confederate armies was less than valiant in
Mm.
the sense that, what's his name? The guy who has the statue to him in Saint Denis,
Quincy Harris.
Quincy Harris, right? That he's kind of a coward, that he abandoned his troops and all this. And it seems likely that the people who scrawled that coward thing were former soldiers from his regiment who,
Mm-hmm.
saw him as abandoning them. I think that was the storyline. It's left kind of a mystery to be sure.
Yeah, because I think we end up getting a encounter with like the Lemoyne Raiders. I think they end up like actually TPing it and destroying it and whatnot.
Yeah.
There's a hidden detail in Boulder Glade that a lot of people miss. It's that there's all of this stuff about the drought, how it like does not rain the entirety of chapter 3. It doesn't rain in Scarlet Meadows until after you've burned the tobacco fields.
Hmm.
But if you go to Boulder Glade after it rains, if you go to Boulder Glade when there's a thunderstorm, you can
There's
hear
a
like
ghost, right?
Yeah, the
the ghost.
voices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize the rain part. I mean, I guess that they need to have the absence of rain to make the tobacco flammable when he goes to burn it down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for illuminating that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have not. I will confess, I have not played Red Dead Redemption 2 in like 2 years because I've finished this project and moved on to other things. But I still, of course, have a very soft spot for the game and probably need to replay it at some point.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
I've got like 55 hours into it and I'm still finding stuff I never knew.
yeah.
Yeah. How many hours do you have in the game, Si?
Probably close to like 2,000.
Oh wow.
Because I've.
See, here's my full disclosure. I've only played for about 200 hours, which is,
That's
a lot for me
still
for a video game.
pretty solid.
But I feel like an imposter inside because there's many fans of the game and readers of my book who've played it a lot more than me,
Mhm.
to be sure. But that's why I can learn from you guys too.
I guess continuing with kind of the Deep South and like family feuds and whatnot.
Ah, yes, the
Grays and the
Grays and
Braithwaites.
Braithwaites. Yeah, what a fascinating part of that story. It's certainly a lot of it's very Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
the
Mhm.
yeah, the feuding families of what is it, medieval Italy or whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, But so I was really interested in how this meshed with a bigger kind of mythologized moment in Southern history, which is the Hatfields and McCoys, because
Yes.
I do think that that is another inspiration behind this. But interestingly enough, the Hatfields and McCoys is very much an Appalachian South story. It's really a mountain South story, not a plantation belt
Oh, okay.
story. Because the Grays and Braithwaites are very much portrayed as cotton plantation families in the kind of flat areas of the South. And of course, there were some quote unquote feuds taking place in that context too, but none are more famous than the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yeah.
So in my book, I decided to put that sort of feuding families stuff in my section on Appalachia rather than my section on the Deep South because I think it fits better there, even though the Greys and Braithwaites are not, in the mountains. Though I will say, despite the fact that that area is pretty flat, Dutch still calls all of them quote unquote hillbillies, despite the fact that this is not a mountain region. So the game does seem a little torn about whether this is an Appalachian thing or if it's just like a deep South thing. Um, but I think it's, the history of the Hatfields and McCoys is really surprising if all you know is the kind of Disney cartoon version of that feud. Like, oh, family A hates the other one and they always have. And well, no, that's actually not what happens. Like, yes, these two families did exchange fire and did employ people who went to war with one another in the 1880s and 1890s. But it's all about money. It's all about business. It's all about capitalism. It's really not about, blood feuds in the terms of if you're born into one family, you will always fight against the other family. That's not what it's about. It's really just about money and business rivalries more than anything. So I tell that whole story in my Hatfields and McCoy chapters, and I hope it's surprising for folks who just have a sort of very flattened understanding of that rivalry.
Yeah, because I feel like between the Hatfields and McCoys and then the Jones Liddell feud as well, both are
Yeah.
very influential on the Braithwaites and the Greys.
Hmm.
And of course, the Braithwaites, their manor is taken directly from real life with the Oak Alley plantation down in Louisiana.
Right, with that, yeah, with like the tree
The tree
lined
line, yeah.
ride up, yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, that's the thing, Rockstar, they are what you'd call culture vultures, in that they
Yes.
borrow and adapt and imitate from all these other forms of pop culture, whether it's movies or whether it's literature. I actually had the chance to chat with Dan Hauser a
Oh,
few months ago, who read my book and said he really enjoyed it, which is pretty
That's
awesome.
cool.
ultimate bragging rights.
I know,
Yeah.
right? So we had a long Zoom call to talk about the book and all that, and he mentioned to me that in writing Red Dead 2, of course he's doing it with a large team, but he has a very important role here. He was talking about how 19th century British literature was such an influence on him. Dickens, especially, writing about kind of urban inequality and all that. In the middle of the 19th century is super interesting. I knew that they were pulling from Hollywood and they're pulling from, kind of TV shows and pop culture, but I didn't think of Dickens.
Over in, well, still technically in Lemoyne, but it's kind of like right on the border between New Hanover and Lemoyne. There's a that Aberdeen pig farm. Of course, iconic within the series itself. um, but that's kind of noted to be with the Bender family from in the 70s, 71 and 72, where of course they would go ahead and take everyone and invite them into their home and then kill them off. And it's interesting with like the pig detail specifically because if you go ahead and I didn't know this for a few years, if you take a body and put it in the pig pen and come back like a few days later, the entire corpse will just be gone.
I definitely did not pick up on that. That's really interesting. Yeah, reminds me of that television show Deadwood. You guys seen that? There's a
So
lot
good.
of feeding of corpses to pigs in that
Yes.
one. pretty pretty gruesome stuff, let's be honest.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like there's so many possibilities in thinking through, what history inspired, various parts of the games, like the Aberdeen pink farm that you mentioned. And generally, what I tried to do in writing my book was to pick moments that could shed light on like big picture stuff. Because as a historian, I'm really interested in teaching and sharing with readers the sort of broader contours of life about society and politics and culture and economics. So I tended to stay away from kind of small inspirations, like, oh, there was this one murder, that inspired this one moment, in part because it was hard for me to tell bigger stories from
Right.
those. But I am really intrigued to learn. And again, fans of the game, you guys and many others, know many of these references sometimes better than I do, because I haven't thought
Yeah.
about
Like
every angle within it.
there's a series on YouTube by Real Pixels,
Yeah, I've
and
seen some of their videos.
yeah,
Yeah, they're cool.
he went through and did the entire history of Red Dead 2, and I think it ended up being like a 8-hour video all put together.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I should have been making videos instead of writing a book, but I know how to write, and I don't know how to make videos.
Right?
And also I get rewarded for writing books as part of my jobs, and I
Yeah,
get rewarded less for making videos.
there you go.
And I
Well,
also,
the book is awesome.
we haven't
Yes.
mentioned this, Red, but like of course the probably the coolest thing about my book is that Roger Clark does the narration of the
Yes.
audiobook.
Mhm.
So that was a pretty amazing, joining of forces that I could not have expected at the beginning of my project. But
Right.
I was enormously thankful to him and to my publisher for arranging that.
Yeah, that was. I remember when that first got announced, even with the class, I was still in high school, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cool. Why can't I be in Tennessee?
Right?
Well, it was really fun because I surprised my students too by bringing both Roger and Rob Wiedoff, John Marston's actor, to my class physically. They both came and surprised the
Oh,
students,
heck
which
yeah.
was pretty awesome. So
That's
believe it
so
or not, I
cool.
did I did a similar thing this semester. So I just got through teaching a class on U.S. history since 1980, so much more recent history through the lens of Grand Theft Auto. So
Yeah.
the class is called Grand Theft America. And just a few weeks ago, I surprised my students by bringing to class in person Sean Fontino, who's the actor who plays Franklin
Franklin.
Clinton in GTA 5,
Heck yeah.
which the students really appreciated. And then I sat down and did a really interesting interview, like a 90-minute interview with Fontino about growing up in Los Angeles in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, which was, he all experienced firsthand some pretty tumultuous moments in Los Angeles history, from the crack cocaine crisis to the LA riots in 92 and so much more. So it
Hmm.
was really interesting. I haven't stopped doing history in video games. I've just switched topics.
Right?
That's why I haven't played Red Dead 2 in the last 2 years, because I've been too busy playing Grand Theft Auto like every single game basically.
Yeah. Plus, with, well, 6 coming out here.
I know.
Who
I'm waiting
knows?
on it just along with everyone else.
Yep.
Well, we can't really do a episode about the secrets of Scarlet Meadows without talking about the women's suffrage, which
Yeah,
we have a whole chapter
absolutely. And
on it.
that's
Yes.
one of the most fascinating parts of this chapter. Not only the fact that the game decides to foreground the women's suffrage movement, but that it places it in the South. Because of course it's a national movement. And what's
Mhm.
interesting is that the women's suffrage movement had won its biggest victories already by 1899 in the West. Like in many states in the West, women could already vote in just about all elections. But in the Deep South, definitely not. The Deep South was one of the kind of real holdouts, one of the real stalwart opponents of women's suffrage, which is quite interesting. They're not the only ones. The Northeast is also pretty aligned against men, since the men are the only ones voting. Northeastern men were quite opposed to a lot of the suffrage movement as well.
Why is it only prevalent in Rhodes and
I
Saint
don't
Denis,
know.
but not really
In part
anywhere
because they'd
else?
already won. They'd already won in like the far west. It always surprises me that the first part of the U.S. to allow women to vote is Wyoming. In part because there were so few women in Wyoming in the 1870s, and they just want to attract women to move out there. Like, hey, come out to Wyoming. You can vote here, because the ratio is like 95 to 5, because this is total like, settler colony that It's a bunch of ragtag men who came out there to work in mines and ranching and all those sorts of things. Um, but one of the reasons that most people don't realize why Southern men were so resistant, to women's suffrage. And you see it in the games. You have Beau Gray's like what's cousins or
Cousins,
something. His,
yeah.
that look
Mhm.
kind of drunk and they're very red faced and they're yelling at the women and all this. One of the key reasons why white Southern men, again, that's the only people who are voting by this time, is that they had just pushed through the removal of black men from voting. Remember, this is the very moment when uh, disfranchisement is being undertaken, and this is what they're doing to remove black men from voting is entirely unconstitutional. I mean, it's completely illegal. It really defies the Reconstruction amendments, especially the 15th Amendment that was passed after the Civil War. So they're flagrantly breaking the law, and they really worried that if people start talking about women voting, it would also raise this inevitable question about, well, what about black women? In fact, what about black men? Why can't they vote? That white Southern men did not want anyone talking about who could vote in at the turn of the century because they just eliminated black men, and they didn't want to bring too much attention to that fact nationally, because then they worried about, maybe there's going to be a second Reconstruction, maybe the federal government's going to send troops down again and completely uh, change up Southern society.
Mm-hmm.
So, we think about women's suffrage being all about gender, but it's also about race, because you can't separate each of those factors from each other.
Yeah, and I mean, just because women could vote didn't mean that it was just like, oh, right, women get all the same rights as men and everything's all fine and normal now for everyone. But it really wasn't like that, even when women could start voting.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's true, right? A lot of things have to wait until the 1960s and 70s to be changed. Yeah, the vote did not solve everything, to be sure. But yeah, Beau Gray
Um,
is such a fascinating character. I really enjoy his
yeah.
presence. I use him a lot in my classroom to try to teach, interesting topics, because he's like this like local voice of dissent. He's a white Southerner from, this regime, but he's critical of it. He sees that it's really broken, really flawed. I mean, he's kind of a doofus too. He's not a complete visionary. He's kind of got his head in the clouds a lot of the time.
But yeah, it's like really interesting too, just within even the gangs, when they're staying at Clemens Point, the encounters that even you'll get with like Tilly Jackson when you're playing, I think, dominoes with her at camp. She'll just
Hmm.
talk Foreman brothers being so close to Clemens Point and right outside of Rhodes, and that being a tremendous point within her backstory. It's
Right.
very interesting between her and, of course, Lenny,
Hmm.
and like you mentioned in the book, even Javier. It's very interesting to like see their dynamic shift between chapter 2 and then 3.
Yeah. Well, I find it really interesting that Rockstar made the Vanderlyn gang really multicultural. I mean,
Yes.
yes, there's more white men than there's any other group, to be sure. But it is a real sort of rainbow coalition of
Yeah.
criminals, you know? And I'm not sure that actually would have been all that realistic. It depends. I mean, there were undoubtedly gangs of outlaws that were, multiracial and multigender. But I know that like the single gang that inspired the Vanderlyn gang more than any other is the Hole in the Wall gang, being
Yes.
Butch
Butch
Cassidy's
Cassidy.
group.
Yep.
They were all English speaking white men. Like
Yeah, between
they were not a rainbow coalition by any means.
yeah, because it's between Hole in the Wall and then James Younger, of course,
Exactly.
the two most. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, both
And
of
they're
those are
also a bunch of
white.
white racist dudes, let's be
Mm-hmm.
honest.
Yeah,
And that's aside from Micah. Micah is like, the only obvious racist that I could find in the bunch.
yeah.
Um
And I mean,
they
Bill a little bit, but he's more
Yeah,
on the fence than Micah is.
right, right. Yeah, they really did their best to paint Micah in every possible negative light,
Yep. I mean, hey, Peter did a
which is
great job
funny.
with what he got handed, so.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I want to talk about fashion in
Ooh,
1899,
yes.
more so to like set the scene for all of our chapter
Yeah.
3 conversations.
Yeah, I
what
don't
all they
so I
got
will
right.
confess I'm not a fashion historian, and I haven't thought that hard through what people were wearing.
Right.
Certainly I know that the game's developers looked at photographs from the period. I know they did so when it came to architecture, and then when they came to,
Mm.
newspaper fonts and uh, um, catalog fonts and all this. But I will not pretend that I'm an expert at Gilded Age fashions. So I'm worried, Sam, that I won't be able to authoritatively answer your questions on that
That's
point.
okay. That's okay.
Yeah. And there's such a
Um,
range of fashion too. I mean, you can dress Arthur in like, 50 different costumes. I mean, there's just such a
Yeah.
wide range of possibilities. So yeah,
have
I
him dressed
don't
as Walter White.
Yeah, there's two things that a lot of fans want to hear about and that I always disappoint on, which one is fashion. The other is like ways of speech and the ways that people talk because,
Yes.
we don't have audio recordings from that period.
Right.
So there's a lot of guesswork that goes into um how historians understand speech and things like that because it's we work with textual documents to make sense out of this period, and that just doesn't capture speech. I do think that the gang does not swear enough. Like they should be cursing more. And we know that Rockstar has no problem with cursing because I've played lots of GTA games that prove to the contrary. It's
Yep.
just that they're a very PG rated bunch of outlaws. They really don't drop F bombs and things like
No.
that when those words were in very common usage, especially among kind of more salt of the earth, working class, humble individuals. I mean, I think the Victorian style middle class tended to prefer, they tended to avoid profanities. And there's, religious profanities were even more powerful then than they were today. But the real life Vanderlyn gang would have dropped some f bombs here and there, and
Yeah.
they don't really do much of that.
No, because
Yeah,
it's
like
interesting.
robbing and
There's.
killing's okay, but swearing is not okay.
Yeah.
Well, some of them have like very middle class aspirations. Like I think Dutch Vanderlyn, he's kind of like a closeted Victorian in a lot of
I love that term.
There's
yeah.
your new gamer tag, Zai.
Yeah, and then
Right?
what's the name of that very well groomed
Josiah
guy?
Trelawney.
Trelawney, exactly right. Like he's trying to style himself as an
Yes.
up and coming dandy, if you will.
Yeah, I feel like
Um,
between them two and then a lot of the women, of course, minus really Sadie, all of them try to be somewhat upper class, especially Mary Beth, as we see her actually become an author after
yeah,
1907.
Also, wouldn't drug use be a little more prevalent among a gang of outlaws in 1899?
yeah,
Maybe
that's
not
a good
necessarily like
question.
smoking weed or anything, but like wasn't like cocaine and like opium and stuff more common?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean the big drug. So cocaine tended to be a working class African American drug in the South, in at this time period. And though we don't see cocaine at all, as far as I can
No,
remember.
we've
It
only
would have
got
been available in
morphine.
like medicinal. You could buy cocaine, drops and
Cocaine gum?
yeah, exactly. There is that in the game, isn't
Mhm.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you can buy it as a medicinal substance because it's definitely not outlawed yet. That comes in the 1920s. Um, so opiates, especially laudanum, right, which is basically a distilled, it's like a milder form of heroin that people would take in these beverages. It was really a middle class female undertaking in this period. So it's a surprise that like Molly or I don't know, Mary Beth is not like sipping laudanum once in a while. But I don't know if they have enough money. Like you have to have some money. They're kind of down and out. The gang, they don't have a lot. Uh,
Right.
the,
That's true.
at least in most of the story, they don't have a lot of money. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's certainly drugs. Marijuana would have been very hard to find outside of the Southwest. That was more of a Mexican American
Mm,
pursuit at that point in time. Not that other groups didn't partake, but it was just not a
not
cultural
coming there.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
No, there's certainly plenty of alcohol, of course, in the game, which
Oh yeah.
there was no shortage of at the time either.
No. Because.
Though to be honest, many parts of the South and some in the West by the 1890s were actually dry. Like they would have enacted prohibition.
Yeah,
We think of
because
Mm.
prohibition coming at the end of the 19 teens, but many parts of the country had already voted themselves dry long in advance of that. Georgia, for example, was completely dry by the 1880s, I believe.
oh,
So
yeah,
would it make more sense since Strawberry's the dry town? Wouldn't it make more sense that like Rhodes be the dry town?
Yeah, it probably would have. Well, it's so interesting that Rockstar made this decision to fictionalize the names of almost everything, right? Of
yeah,
course, there was no
Mm.
place called Scarlet Meadows. There was no Saint Denis. I
right.
mean, everything is fictionalized except for the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons were real.
Yep,
They
and they
existed
got mad.
by that name. Yeah, they got mad. They sued
They sued
Rockstar
him,
as a result.
and
They didn't get anything out of it, of course,
no.
but they tried.
Yeah. It's interesting too talking about how like they fictionalized everything, and of course there's little like tidbits of these towns and like all these different like areas, but the only one that is kind of a carbon copy is Saint Denis with New Orleans.
Hmm. Right, right. I mean, in many ways, they're following the kind of GTA 5, Los Santos, Los Angeles,
Yes.
formula that they've put in place. And it's actually been really interesting to play so much GTA in the past few years after playing a lot of Red Dead previously, because there's so many parallels, that they're also trying to satirize and create sort of like a funhouse mirror version of American society, though they go a lot further in GTA. They,
Mm-hmm.
the bizarreness and the parody go a lot further in that game than in Red Dead. Red Dead's just a lot more serious and thoughtful of a game. It's
Yeah.
just the tone of the two games is so different. And yeah, like it's funny, like
Well,
on my campus here, there were students who were like, yeah, okay, a history class through Red Dead, that makes sense. But then when I tell them I'm doing a history class through Grand Theft Auto, they're like, no way, that's not possible. How
Yeah.
could you ever do that?
It was interesting too because I didn't even know you did the GTA course. I see in your post about it, and that was it. But of course, when you did the Red Dead course, I was seeing it all over, and it's
Because you're
interesting.
probably subscribed to a bunch of Red Dead stuff and not a bunch
yeah.
of
Yep.
GTA stuff.
I mean, even
Yep.
GTA, most of like the pages I cover, like, do share
Yeah.
both, especially well right now with
Well, I'll
six
say
under
this
one.
though, when in last fall when I announced my Grand Theft America class, it made much bigger waves on social media than anything I'd done on Red Dead Redemption.
Oh,
In part because GTA is just so much bigger of a game
right.
ultimately.
That's true.
Um, and also the level of shock and surprised that a college professor would actually try to use that game. Um,
Yeah.
that was just kind of like, what? How is that even possible? It became a punchline for jokes among many people, which I understand. But like, and there's it was a challenge to do this class. Don't get me wrong. And there were huge parts of GTA that I just did not bring into my classroom because it's just too offensive or tongue in cheek or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But there's a lot of smart satire in that game as well. It's not just it's not all just potty humor, even though there's a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyhow, this is a Red Dead podcast, not a GTA podcast, so I will shut up about this.
Hey, it's all Rockstar.
That's okay.
It's true, same writers, same developers.
Yep.
There's a lot of commonalities.
That there is, and
And
Mm.
that's what like when I was thinking of a follow-up to the Red Dead book and Red Dead class, I was thinking like, well, what other video games are there that can help me teach big topics in American history? And the reality is that there's not not that many that
mm-mm.
include so much kind of granular satire and references to social and cultural issues. I mean, most games are very flat. Like they're about shooting, they're about guns, they're about tanks, and like yeah, there's that in all the Red Dead and or GTA games too. But like, there's a whole lot more. There's a much more eagerness to like to say something about American life and society, and most games steer clear of that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you'll write a GTA's history book?
Oh, I'm very much thinking about it.
Hold them by
Yeah,
it.
I am very much planning to do so. I'm hoping to do so. So
Cool.
stay tuned.
Awesome.
Can't wait for
Yeah,
it.
Yeah, that'll
got to
be
get the
good.
right audiobook narrator though, right?
Yeah.
You got quite a few to choose from.
Right.
There are indeed.
Getting back into Scarlet Meadows, I think we need to go back to your New Orleans 1899 chapter, even though that's not technically Rhodes, but you talk a lot about Jim Crow and Robert Charles, and
Yes.
I keep like going back to that in the book, but like I'm also trying to pay attention to what you're saying, so I'm like, can we touch on this a little bit more?
Yeah. Right. So, in researching the real history of New Orleans, I was really intrigued to learn that just a few months after when the fictional Red Dead 2 game is set, there was also a huge firefight between the police and an outlaw on the run, that included crowds even bigger than those in Red Dead Redemption 2, like crowds numbering in the thousands that are all like crowds of thousands shooting at a single guy. That sounds like completely bizarre. It sounds even more extreme than Red Dead 2, but it happened because this guy, Robert Charles, was pursued by the New Orleans police for himself for shooting several police officers. So, on one hand, it sounds like, oh, it's Arthur Morgan all over again. Except it's actually much more complicated because Robert Charles is a black man and every member of the NOPD at the time was white. And Robert Charles was essentially rebelling against the Jim Crow system as it was coming about, and he's doing so violently. This is in 1900, in the summer of 1900, so not all that long after Arthur is riding through Saint Denis. A bunch of police just kind of accost Robert Charles and his friend as they're sitting on a porch in New Orleans, and try to knock him around and arrest them. And he's like, I'm not taking this shit. And he pulls out a weapon of his own and starts shooting at the police. And this guy knows a lot about guns. He can craft his own ammunition. He has Winchesters. He has revolvers. He is armed to the teeth, as some people were at the time. And there's this massive manhunt that ultimately grows into what folks have called a race riot, where mobs are just going all over the city looking for any black people to beat up, to kill. They do kill several people. There's this enormous convulsion of violence that has everything to do with race and about this new system of Jim Crow, which is coming into being. So it's a very telling moment that can shed a lot of light on the bigger social dilemmas of the time period. But at face value, it very closely resembles, what the Vanderlyn gang is doing, except, the police are pursuing the Vanderlyns because they robbed a bank, not because they're, critiquing the racial, systems of the day. That's not really what's going on. So the game kind of flattens this out, of course, and removes the complexities from it. But it is an interesting parallel, I found, very much so.
I'm looking at the Lost Cause chapter now. I'm kind of going backwards, I guess. I don't know how much
Thanks
we've
for
already
reading
talked
my book
about.
so closely. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
It was a lot of
um,
fun to write, I gotta say.
I can imagine. Um, you talk about the St. Andrew's cross design on the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at right now. Not like
Right. So,
I've read the book, but that's what I'm looking at right now. Like, what's grabbing my attention?
yeah, it's really intriguing that Rockstar does not include that symbolism of the Confederate battle flag within the game,
Mhm.
because by 1899, the state flag of Mississippi included that symbol. It was fresh; it had just recently been put on there that decade, but it was there and it was being revived. That flag, it was being brought out, it was being introduced into public life all the time. And again, I think Rockstar just wanted to avoid controversy, in part because
Probably.
when you create an open world game where there's such an element of player choice, players can do whatever vile thing they want, capture it on YouTube, and then the online world is shocked by, oh, how awful Rockstar is. Like the classic example here is with the women's suffrage
Mm-hmm.
activists, who very soon after this game came out, some jerk on the internet decide like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go kill one of these suffragists and say, oh, I'm beating up a feminist or whatever, this is fun. And literally millions of people were like, wow, Rockstar made a game about beating up feminists. And it's total bullshit. It's not at all what the game is about. This plot line does not at all lean you toward that outcome. It's very sympathetic to women suffragists. But because the game gives you freedom to do what you want, to shoot or attack who you want, it allows for the possibility of, the kind of lowest common denominator, doing the worst thing possible. And then the company has to deal with the backlash of that.
Mm.
So I can imagine that's also why, they did not include the Confederate battle flag, even though it was realistic in that that symbol was being reintroduced into Southern society. They just probably had nightmare visions of what some really gross gamers were going to do with it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that women's suffrage video, that was unfortunately my introduction to Red Dead Redemption 2.
Ugh.
Yeah, and it's probably did not leave a good taste in your mouth. But,
No.
what most people don't realize is like that's not the game.
Mm.
That's what
Right.
someone did with its sandbox, but it's not what I did with it. It's not how
No.
I play the game. It's not how the designers want you to play the game. But well, I use the James Younger gang as the opening anecdote for the book
Mm-hmm.
because in some senses, they sound so much like the Vanderlyn gang in that they have this rivalry with the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons try to eliminate them. However, this is in the 1870s, in the
Yeah,
early
79,
1870s.
I think.
Yeah, which is just a lot earlier than the Red Dead game is set.
Yeah.
I, and this is one of my bigger theories about Red Dead 2 is that like they really wanted to make a game about the 1870s, like especially the early 1870s. The problem is if they did, it wouldn't work with Red Dead 1 because that's set in 1911.
Red
And if
Dead
you're going to have
3.
the same, well, yeah, that's right. Make you go back.
Here's hoping.
Rockstar, they just want to make an 1870s game in part because the 1870s are even more tumultuous and violent and uncertain than the especially 1899. But they just couldn't do it and keep Dutch as a character because he would have been, not even born in 1871 or whatever. So, yeah, the James Younger gang is, but they're so often remembered as these Western outlaws, and which, yeah, maybe they are. Missouri is their home base, but they're so Southern. There's so much about the Civil War. There's so much sort of holdouts from the Civil War who is still fighting some of the same battles even into the 1870s, which we tend to think, oh, the Civil War ends in 1865. That's all over at that point. Well, no, it's definitely not. There's guerrilla warfare that continues. There's violence that continues, and I think they encapsulate the sort of long civil war that does not really end at all. I mean, violence continues for quite some time.
So did your like knowledge and education on all of this change the way that you played the game the first time? Like did it were you sitting there like that's not accurate? Were you getting like mad about it?
Me
Well,
with
I
guns.
think I was because remember I picked up the game just for fun, just as a hobby. I was not planning
Mhm.
to do anything professional with it whatsoever. So I think coming in, I was just expecting to be disappointed. I was expecting like Hollywood nostalgia and mythology. And of course, there is some of that in the games, there's no doubt. But I was not expecting as much reference to major historical topics, and as much nuance that they would provide. So I was really quite pleasantly surprised. If I was completely disappointed with this game, I don't think I would have taught a class on it or written a book about it.
Right.
It's the fact that
Fair.
the games they get a lot right, and even when they get things wrong, it allows me to kind of teach why it's wrong. Like
Mm.
for example, back to those statues. Like why do the statues all look old? Well, that can get us to understand how does the lost cause work? Why does it resurface so aggressively in the 1890s? Those are all big dilemmas that are not easily explained, but with a little bit of time and effort, you can make sense out of them. So yeah, it was a weird experience playing it as a historian. There's no doubt about it, And it's so funny, like when I picked up that game in the summer of 2020. I was really worried that it would impact my career in some way. Like mainly like I'd become addicted to video games again and I wouldn't do the rest of my work. I could never have predicted that it would impact my career in a positive way, like in a beneficial way, that it would improve my teaching, that it would allow me as a writer to find audiences that I had not found previously. all of that was completely unthinkable. In part because like there's so much taboo about video games still. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little older than you guys, so maybe I feel it differently, but like there's still a lot of people my age who are like, "Oh, video games are childish. They're a waste of time. They're unserious. No one of significance plays video games." And like that's totally not true. It's just total BS.
Mm-hmm. What were some of your favorite classics? Your '90s video games?
Oh wow. Well, so as I mean, so I definitely had my Super Nintendo phase, and I played a lot of Japanese RPGs, especially like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy and things like that. But most of my time in high school was spent on the PC, and it was mainly first-person shooters, to be honest. It was like Quake and Doom, Half-Life, especially. Like Half-Life was a real turning point for me. Uh, I love the Blizzard games, so I played a lot of Warcraft and Starcraft when those came out. Deus Ex was a really cool, like immersive first-person shooter. Um, but then, like, right when I started college, I quit, and so I did play GTA 1 and 2. That's important to note. Like when those games, the top-down 2D GTA games came out, I really enjoyed those. But by the time the GTA 3 came out and it went 3D, I had quit video games. I wasn't playing them anymore. So I played all those classics like very recently to prepare for this class. I was not playing them in the early 2000s when they came out. Are you guys lifelong gamers? Have you done it your entire careers?
Yeah, I mean, Red Dead's been basically my entire life. My dad
Yeah.
got me into it when I was 8, and I never stopped.
That's awesome. Yeah, the game is Red Dead 2 has been out for almost 8 years
8
at this
years
point.
now,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
My brother was a big gamer. I grew up in the '90s playing like Sega and Nintendo 64. I had like the
Mm,
DS. I was big on my DS, but
yeah.
I loved my Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, well, I still play a lot of video games for fun. It's still my hobby. I have not quit. I've been now
Good.
playing for 6 years. And of course, playing Rockstar games has started to feel like work because it's, what I'm going to be teaching and writing about. But I do love many other video games that have come out since then.
Yeah.
What are some of your current favorites besides Red Dead and GTA?
Yeah. Well, so I'd say my favorite game that I've played since getting back into gaming in the pandemic is The Witcher 3, which is just awesome. Such an epic open world
That's cool.
RPG.
Mm.
And I played Cyberpunk 2077, which is made by that same studio, which is also really good. Um, I really enjoyed. Um, let's see, I was playing a lot of Hollow Knight recently, which is a totally different kind of game, like a 2D side scroller. Spent a lot of time with that one. Um, Last year's Claire Obscure Expedition 33. Love that game. That was both new and nostalgic for me. It felt very
Mm.
much like the Japanese RPGs that I was playing back in the 1990s.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a whole lot. You know, I mean, I guess right now I'm most looking forward to GTA 6, but I know I'm gonna have to like teach and write about it, so it's like half work, half play.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right on, y'all. Well, unfortunately, I gotta hop off. I gotta go grade some papers. It is still final
Oh.
exam season here.
Oh.
I've got all my
Fun.
students in, as you can see here, Grand Theft America. This is the syllabus for the class.
That's
Heck
cool.
yeah.
They all took their final exams last week.
Ah.
So there's no questions about Michael and Trevor, or it's actually just all American history.
Heck
Well,
yeah.
very cool. Where can people get your book?
People can buy Red Dead's history at any major book retailer. Amazon certainly one of them. The audiobook, narrated by Roger Clark, is available on Audible, on Google Books, on Apple Podcast Music, whatnot. So you can find it pretty much anywhere. And I hope you give it a chance. If you are curious about the deeper historical significance of the Red Dead games, or just curious about Western history or Southern history or whatever, then I hope it scratches an itch. It was certainly fun to write, and I'm deeply thankful to you two for reading it so closely.
Yeah, of course.
Well, thank you
Fun
for
to write.
joining us. Thank you
Thanks
for
Yes,
again
writing
for
your
definitely.
book.
inviting me. Yeah, it sounds good.
All right.
All right, thanks again for having me.
Yeah.
All right,
Very good.
best of luck with the rest of the podcast.
Yes.
Have
Thank
a
you
Thank you.
good
Thanks
much.
for
summer.
joining us. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for us today, Outlaws. Thank you so much for spending time with us here at the Outlaw Haven. It really means a lot to us. We upload every Thursday at 3 a.m. Eastern Time, so if you like what you heard, make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss what's coming next. Also, please take a moment to leave us 5 stars because it's the best way to support what we do. I'm Sam.
I'm Zaya.
And this is the Outlaw Haven.
This world has a lot of ugly in it, but it sure as hell has a lot of beauty. You eat babies.